Hey, everybody, welcome to podcast number two. Today is January 24th, 2025. And I think the primary topic for today is going to be human history, ancient human history, prehistory, according to historians. I mean, I guess it would be considered prehistory, and maybe ancient technology or the potential, the idea of ancient technology and how these ancient cultures may have harnessed some things that we have lost and that may have come up in more recent history, but have been suppressed, or at least to my knowledge, have been suppressed. Like some work Nikola Tesla's done, um, a few inventors and scientists who have either probably been killed or their work has been suppressed or lost funding or and its connection to the rediscovery of this technology thousands and thousands of years later after tens of thousands of years later after it was discovered, because you got to remember Homo sapiens have been around for I think 270,000 years, is the oldest skeleton, Homo sapien skeleton. So yeah, um pretty cool stuff. It's gonna be another solo episode. I want to have a guest on. I'm in the works of getting guests on, just people I know in my life that I could probably have an interesting conversation with. Um, and soon, very soon, I'm going to be getting some documentary style footage and video out that's a lot more higher quality than this. The voiceover is a lot higher quality. The video itself is a lot higher quality. Um, and it's going to be, probably half as long as these podcasts, if even. But I'm really hoping that if the podcasting doesn't do too well, that those videos do, because I'm putting a lot more time into that with the editing and all that. This is like not even edited, it's just kind of straight to the point. Yeah. Um, where should I begin? Last episode, I touched briefly on the precession of the equinox and how the knowledge of the precession of the equinox by ancient cultures like the ancient Egyptians could be used to date the Sphinx, since it originally was the body and head of a lion until recarved in the Old Kingdom, which is what it's dated to. Doesn't really make sense if it was recarved and the erosion patterns on it, are different. But a lot of this stuff, like I wish I could pull visuals up to show, but yeah, I don't think I'd be getting these podcasts out as quickly or as consistently or even at all if I was adding a bunch of photos and footage. So that's what the documentary videos are going to be for. It's going to be like the podcast, but it's going to be a lot more like in depth with the visuals. Like this is just kind of something to listen to. Um, yeah. So a lot of people don't find, like I never really found history like that entertaining. Like especially schools conventional teaching of history. It's just kind of like far more recent than I'd like it to be. Like we only really touch, and at least U.S. schools, we only really touch on history, United States history, and then we go over some brief world history, and it's all within the last 1,000, 2,000 years that we really go back as far, even at all. And I feel like it just kind of makes history boring because you're kind of just learning about you're learning about after a bunch of stuff that had taken place before it. And historians date the beginning of human civilization to, I believe, 6000 BC, somewhere in there in Sumer, the beginning of human civilization and cities and agriculture and all that. And I really think you could push back that date quite far, and the date of the colonizing of the Americas really far. Recently, there's been footprints that have been discovered in North America or South America that are 23 to 27,000 years old. And yeah, that just pushes it back so much further than we already thought. And I really think it could go back even further than that. I think humans are naturally curious about their environment, about the world that they live in. And as soon as people went to a beach on any continent, I'm sure that they were wondering what's on the other side of this vast ocean. What's over the horizon that I can't see? And they sent explorers with whatever resources, or regardless if they were hunter gatherers or had a civilization, or as soon as they saw ants floating on a log, they knew if they got a big enough stick, they could float too. So pretty straightforward. And I think Homo sapiens in general are very intelligent, and that's how we got to where we are today. And I don't think we only got here now. I think we've got to this point technology wise before, not the same technology, not the same function, not the same uses, not the same society, but, and maybe not the same global population, but we definitely got to somewhere like this before with advanced technology that was probably more clean, more abundant, and less harmful to the planet that we live on. And a lot of this comes from Christopher Dunn's work, John Anthony West, Robert Schoch. There's a lot of work in the pushing back the date of the Sphinx and the pyramids of Giza. And when you analyze the pyramids of Giza's internal chambers and everything in and around the pyramid, the different stone that they use to construct the pyramid, the chambers inside the pyramid, the 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 halls, everything, you can come to the conclusion that it probably had some type of function, and that it wasn't a tomb. Um, Maybe later pharaohs, you know, living in the area of these massive pyramids that were probably more like temples to them in their time. I could see why maybe a pharaoh would want to be buried in, near, or around a pyramid because of its significance to their society. But I think during the time of the Old Kingdom, when the pyramids, the Great Pyramids, the most spectacular pyramids, were said to have been built, I think that they were already way old around that time. And hold on one second. I mean, we know now, or right now, there's already different cultures and societies and civilizations that are all coexisting at the same time. So, you have something like New York City or Los Angeles or any major city, any modern society with government. And then you also have, tribes and hunter-gatherers and people who've been living the same way for thousands and thousands of years in human history. And if you can have both of those coexisting at the same time, then if we look back at the historical timeline of human civilization, if you go back far into the past, pre-ice age or during the last ice age, more than 10,000 years ago, y- there's going to be more advanced societies and cultures and less advanced, or I guess it depends on what you see as advanced, but hunter-gatherer type cultures and uh, society civilization based cultures. And to say that they were all hunter-gatherers that long ago, when I just looked it up actually, they're saying anywhere from 280 to 350,000 years is the earliest known Homo sapien remains, earliest known, by the way. So if we've been around for that long, then why only 6,000 years ago in Sumer is when they claim that civilization, human civilization began? Because I really think that a lot of these ancient sites were repurposed later on, and hieroglyphs you only see come later. If you look at the stonework, you see these hieroglyphs almost added after or far later. Like the hieroglyphs came from the Old Kingdom and a little pre-Old Kingdom, and then were used then on. And if you go back far enough, a lot of these structures I think are older, and they originally didn't have any names or pharaohs carved into them or any attribution to anyone. And when later Egyptians came along, they attributed them to that culture and that society of the time. And this kind of all of this kind of mess with history, like the Sacsayhuaman in Peru, Machu Picchu, Egypt, Göbekli Tepe. Well, I don't want to include Göbekli Tepe in this conversation of about to talk about architecture. There's different levels of architecture in Egypt and Peru and different ancient sites around the world that are really old. There's a level of stonework that I don't know if you've seen images of this, but there's stones that are fit together like like massive puzzle pieces, hundreds and hundreds of times, and some even thousands of times, and they're fit together, interlocking pieces that have no mortar, nothing that holds them together other than the weight of the stones next to them, and they interlock perfectly. Not only does the outside interlock and match the different faces of the stone, but the inside of the stone interlocks and match the other faces of the stone. So there are all these interlocking stones that couldn't have been carved out of the rock that way and have them match up perfectly unless you like rub them together. Or I mean, sanding this down to get this perfection would be impossible. Um, and even lifting some of these stones for the technology said that they had at the time, and even carving them would have been impossible. Like the Bronze Age that came after the Stone Age, when they started experimenting with metals, post Ice Age, um, this couldn't have been done with copper or tin. Is granite is harder than the material used to supposedly carve it. Like granite and diorite are both harder than bronze. A bronze chisel striking against granite, you're gonna need more bronze to build the pyramid than you'd need granite. Because by the on your 12th strike on the chisel, you're gonna need a new chisel. You're gonna have to reform the chisel because it's already been deformed that much from pounding into the rock. Some of these couldn't have been cut with hand saws. Eh, Cutting these with hand saws and polishing these couldn't have been done. It's almost like there's a different technique that I don't think it was machining. I mean, it looks like machine work to a lot of stonemasons, but I don't think that they had machines. And if they did, that's just more confusing than them having a different method that is more sophisticated that they came up with themselves. Like there's different theories like frequency and vibrating the stones and being able to cut through them more easily by vibrating them to a particular frequency. I'm not too sure. There's a bunch of theories. Um, but yeah, the interlocking puzzle pieces on top of them, you see brick and mortar. You see rocks and binding material to bind the rocks together. And it's on top of these ancient stone works, stone walls, and at least I'm referring to Sacsayhuaman right now and Picchu. And it's like, why are these? Why is it all attributed to the Inca? Did the Inca forget how to do the more sophisticated, longer lasting method and decided to just throw rocks on top of it and call it a day? Or were they repairing a part of the wall that has been there and always been there since they can remember? And I really think that that's what a lot of these ancient sites are, sites that are so old that after society or civilizations wiped out and people return to these, the pyramids and Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman, they're just blown away and they just take over the site for themselves because why build a whole new why would I take my people and take them somewhere and set up shop and build a whole new city when there's these cities just lying around that have always been there since we can remember. And I think that's what a lot of these ancient sites are. Repurposed walls, repurposed cities that have stood the test of time and have outlived the people because of the construction method and how advanced it is. The sites outlived the civilization that built them, and later societies came and took over them. And then history was rewritten because they find Incan artifacts, Old Kingdom, New Kingdom Egyptian artifacts, and writing and culture and art and stone thrown on top of older stones. And it blurs because you can't carbon date stone. You can't test the date of rock. Rock is as old as the earth. It's been there. And so only organic matter can be carbon dated because organic matter lives and dies and calcifies and returns to the earth. And it comes and goes, and it's easy to carbon date that because it had a time that it lived, it had a time that it died, and so on. So if you go to these sites and you find a piece of wood or a chisel or something constructed by a later culture and you carbon date it and it gives you the date, and then you date that to the age of the site, but it came thousands and thousands of years after the site was already there. So it's just blurred like, oh, it's just so incredible. Um, that's why sites like Göbekli Tepe are so amazing because Göbekli Tepe was buried and it wasn't discovered for more than 10,000 years because it's a 12,000-year-old site. And that pushed back the date of civilization from 6,000 BC in Sumer to during the last ice age or the end of the last ice age. And it's incredible because because it was buried, it's now able to be dug up and looked at, even though they've only dug up 5% of it and they don't plan on excavating anymore, which is terrible for archaeology and history and science, but whatever, and human origins. But I really think that, like, a lot of these sites in Egypt and Peru are older than Göbekli Tepe. There's just so much evidence that it's newer because of later peoples that peopled the area. It just fucked up history's timeline. So ah, it's so bizarre and so crazy, and there's stories of there's a lot. Um, yeah, but I really recommend y'all go look at the different levels of architecture and the stonework and the massive stone puzzle piece fitting stuff with the less sophisticated work on above it, which means that the stuff on the bottom is older. Yet it's both attributed to the exact same people that supposedly built it, the Inca, but that just doesn't make sense to me. The Inca repairing their own site that they built with less sophisticated methods at the same time that they supposedly built it. It just it same thing with Egypt. It doesn't make sense. And I recommend y'all look into Sacsayhuaman. It's one of my the most fascinating sites. And Egypt really is there's a reason it's so popular and so astounding. Um yeah, so with Christopher Dunn's theory on the Giza power plant, the ability of the Great Pyramid to generate energy for pre-ancient Egyptians, because him, Robert Schoch, and John Anthony West all kind of agreed that this is much older than historians are saying it is. So, yeah, I'd recommend y'all listen to them speak on this and look into a lot of their work. Um, Rest in peace, John Anthony West, but and I believe Robert. I'm not. No, I think he's still with us. I think he's still with us. Um, so there's a lot of different things to discuss on how the pyramid could have generated power and what that power would even be utilized for. Um, I think the energy could have been used for something. I mean, if you look at these sites from above the ground, all of the interlocking stone and all of the stonework and all of that whole site, the whole ancient site itself, a lot of these ancient sites look like a massive circuit board. Now, I'm not saying that these sites were any type of circuitry, but you can generate electricity using stone crystals. Granite is 50% quartzite crystal, and the way a barbecue lighter works is when you pull the trigger on the lighter, it squeezes this quartz crystal or adds tension to this quartz crystal, and it causes it to produce a spark, which sparks the flame. And if you had millions of tons of granite, all containing half of it containing that crystal, yeah, you can. use stone to build these massive structures and also have them transmit electricity and conduct electricity. And the limestone encasings around the pyramid were insulating it. Because limestone is more of an insulator than the granite that contained within the side of the pyramid. Um, yeah, and there is a there used to be or still is this water beneath the pyramid that I think had something to do with it, and it was more there when the Nile flowed up alongside of the Great Pyramid. But also, I feel like I need to mention that during the supposed time of the construction of the Great Pyramid, that's attributed to by historians, the Great Pyramid was, I believe, supposedly constructed around 3000 BC, according to historians. And what doesn't make sense about that is during that time, the Sahara was already desert. It was already desertified. But if you, I'm trying to push back this date so you can get an understanding of how old these pyramids probably are, and a lot of these ancient sites probably are. The Sahara wasn't always desert, just like South America, North America, Asia, Europe, Africa, all of these continents weren't always there. The Everything is constantly changing. The Earth's surface is constantly changing. The Sahara during the last ice age was a savanna, and it supported plant life, different varieties of animals in Africa, and now it's a desert. And to think that they built pyramids in the middle of the desert, and I mean by the Nile, I guess, but the Nile River Valley used to be lush and green and almost tropical. And I think that that would have been the best time to build it. I think that the Great Pyramids of Giza, the big three, there's a lot more different pyramids that I could discuss, but those are the most profound. I think that those were constructed at the same time, around the same time, and I think that at least the big one, the Great Pyramid of Giza, was constructed anywhere from either 12,000 years ago ish, give or take a few thousand years, or 36,000 years ago ish. One of those two time periods. And that's if the Sphinx was constructed during the same time of the Great Pyramid, which I believe that it was, or it came much later. And that's all because of the precession of the equinox, the lion staring at its own constellation, and the sky on the rising sun. Um, Something like that. Sounds stupid. But yeah. Um, Back to the electricity. It's rumored that the capstone in the Great Pyramid was potentially made out of gold, which of course isn't there anymore because it's fucking gold. But if that's the case, and Tesla trying to make a complete circuit out of the lithosphere, the ground, and the atmosphere, and being able to light light bulbs miles away with his Wardenclyffe Tower, um, if you can turn the air and ground into a complete circuit by transmitting ions of electricity in the atmosphere, then and having a free energy method like the pyramid, with all of the physioelectric effects that was probably being used to produce it, just like that barbecue lighter that we talked about, and it being able to light the gas inside of a lighter, I think that that has something to do with it. Um, and the pyramid carried this electricity up through the granite quartz crystal, up the entire structure into the gold capstone, and was released from there somehow, some way. But that, like, as crazy as that sounds, that is far more likely the case for the pyramid than it being just a simple tomb. Like, to have a supposed workforce that large to construct a temple for a pharaoh during this said time, it just like none of it lines up to like the all of the evidence. This is why you didn't you need different eyes on this, like not just traditional archaeologists. Like they do great jobs, but like you don't just need Zahi Hawass. You need a bunch of different eyes from different career backgrounds and knowledge of different things. Like you need astrophysicists, you need astronomers, you need uh, stonemasons, you need geologists, you need all of these people to come together and figure out the story of what this was, how it ended up here, and what its purpose was to these people. Not just everything, every every single ancient site that historians come across is always labeled a tomb or a temple or some kind of religious structure. And it's just silly because it's like, yes, some of these may be that, but every single site that we come across is just a tomb or a temple. Every single significant site is just a tomb or a temple for the gods or a king or a pharaoh. And I just don't agree with that at all. I think that I think that they're far more sophisticated than people give them credit for. And I don't mean sophisticated by like they figured out the wheel or they figured out a pulley system or simple little gadgets like that. I think they're sophisticated in ways that we have yet to rediscover. And if we have rediscovered, it's been silenced by people. I don't want to say which people, but people for who work for people. And oil is the biggest industry in the world. And to have that industry eliminated by free energy technology that can provide free electricity to every man, woman, and child on the entire planet by harnessing it from the earth and nature itself, which is possible, by the way. It's not impossible to harness energy from the giant spinning ball that we live on that's spinning at thousands of miles per hour. Like it's not impossible to harness energy from something along those lines or something else. And we already have technology that harnesses energy in different ways other than burning something and pushing it out the back to generate electricity or movement. It's just it's so silly. I'm not saying we don't rely on oil, we don't need oil today, but I really think that it'd be better for the whole world if there was a free think of the cost of goods for the consumer at the store if every time they transported those goods that they're transporting them for free. Imagine companies didn't have to pay gas prices or an electricity bill to run their stores or to pay for the trucks that transport the gas. Obviously, I want truckers to have jobs. I'm saying that the trucks that the truckers drive don't need to rely on gas. Today they do. In modern society they do, but we have the technology and have the science to be able to not have to do that. Does it bother me that we do? No, not really, but like everything's so expensive because it has to go like there's so much that these companies are paying for, and obviously they could reduce the price. with or without paying for all of that. But yeah, they could reduce the prices anyways and still make a profit. But it would be a lot cheaper for the consumer and for everyone living if there was no electricity bill, there wasn't gas prices, and it'd be a lot better for the world. Um, yeah, and I just think that we need to do better and stuff. Um, there's the water erosion around the Sphinx enclosure, and that's pretty cool. And kind of pushes back the date along with the precession of the equinoxes. The erosion itself can push back the dating of a lot of these sites, especially since there's water erosion in the now desert that has been that way for quite a minute. And I, yeah, kind of blanking right now. There's some cool vases, and there's pottery, and there's like these vases that are carved out of stone, which I think is really interesting because the vases carved out of stone are far more intricate, far more sophisticated. They're so thin that you can see a light on the inside of them. If you put a light inside of them, that's how thin some of these granite vases are. And they're incredible. How would you carve the inside of it like that? How would you carve the outside of it like that? They're so perfect. When they're put in a computer and analyze that every dimension on it is flat and flush and perfectly symmetrical down to like 2,000ths of an inch, which I think is less than the width of a human hair. So, or about the width of a human hair. So, where that's like computer cutting stone type sophistication, and to eyeball that is just impossible. It's really impossible to have something that could cut that, or cut it by hand, or to sand it down with something flat enough and perfect enough that you couldn't eyeball that. You could have a tool that's eyeballed enough that they could even cut it like that. Like it's incredible. I recommend you look at the granite vases. And what's funny is these vases, the granite vases, are put next to Egyptian pottery, and I find that hilarious because you see that all across the ancient world and history. You see very sophisticated things that we don't really think of as sophisticated because it's a vase, but it's so much more than just a fucking vase. And then you see it next to other vases that are pottery, that are clay, and it's just like how can you put something so intricate next to something that really anybody in that time could have did? And I mean, not anybody, it's pottery people, but it's just wild. And even some of the clay pottery vases are speckled with paint, and they're speckled in a way to where it almost looks like the Egyptians of that time were trying to replicate the the visual of the granite vases. So the granite vases are speckled, they have different minerals in them because it's granite. And then you see these clay pottery with the same speckling paint pattern as the granite vases. And it's almost like they were like, they couldn't do what they did out of granite. So the best that they could do was make them look like the granite with the paint. It's almost like they're respecting the granite vases by imitating them with clay pottery. It's very interesting, and you see a lot of imitation. That's A lot worse. There's a lot of stoneworks that you can see, a lot of statues that have hieroglyphs carved into them, and the hieroglyphs are at a worse level of detail and a lot less sophisticated than the stonework itself. So you're gonna get your best stone cutter to carve these beautiful stoneworks out of diorite, black diorite, and granite, and it's just beautiful. And then you're gonna get somebody to go come back and do the hieroglyphs that kind of does a little janky job and kind of puts them wherever they want on the hands, the feet, the face, the side. And it's almost like these statues were graffitied on by later Egyptians that were either their job was to write on them or they felt like writing on them or they were told to write on them, whatever it may be. The same person who carves the magnificent symmetrical, beautiful stoneworks that you can go look at online and Egyptian statues. Like you can tell the difference between the new and old ones. The old ones are always prettier. Trust me. The older you get, the older the stonework, the more beautiful it is. And you just see this everywhere. You see Egyptian columns that aren't stacked, and then you see stacked Egyptian limestone columns, which is a soft stone. You see a lot of it. Um, and stacked columns aren't as difficult as full on stone columns. So yeah, it's it's so cool. It's so much cooler than it sounds. I don't. It's hard to talk to people about this because you really got to learn that like holy shit, like all of history might be wrong. Like we don't know what the Egyptians were doing. We don't know if they had technology that was superior in terms of energy or whatever to ours. And it's just like wow. So like all of history or a lot of it might be just incorrect in terms of the timeline. Like Columbus Day is a thing here in the United States, like Christopher Columbus. And I don't know if the guy deserves a holiday, but 1492, as long ago as that sounds, in the grand scheme of things, isn't very long ago at all. 1492, yeah, he sailed the ocean blue, but like it it's not that impressive when you consider maybe 100,000 years ago, somebody sailed the Atlantic Ocean, somebody sailed the Pacific Ocean. Um, it's believed that Indo-Australian, indigenous Australian people may have sailed across the Pacific to South America long before anybody crossed any kind of ice bridge. And I'm not saying that nobody crossed the the Bering Land Bridge from Asia into Alaska, but it just doesn't make any sense that it would take us so long to sail any oceans. I'm quite positive that came early on in the Homo sapien species, and I really think that we were doing that a long time ago. And there's a lot of evidence that's now pointing to that humans were sailing vast distances of water long before ever thought possible or ever thought capable. And it's just it's crazy because just wow. And the type of animals that they would have encountered here in the Americas would have been vastly different from any animals that they, or a lot different than animals that they would have encountered in Asia or Europe. Um, there, Africa has a lot of the similar animals to what they would have found here in the Americas. There's the short-faced bear, which is larger than a polar bear and a grizzly, and it inhabited North America. I'm not sure about South America. And all of these animals went extinct at the end of the last ice age when the melt water from the Laurentide ice sheet that covered the top of the North American continent, almost all of Canada, under like a mile thick sheet of ice, melted away very rapidly over the course of a very short amount of time and caused a lot of flooding in the Americas, and especially North America. And it killed off the short-faced bear, the mammoth population, the giant sloth. 70% of large megafauna mammals went extinct at that time. And that's why the Americas and North America has just, bunnies, squirrels, a lot of smaller mammals, and then a few larger mammals scattered here and there. But there used to be mammals that were bigger than any mammals that you would find. There was the North American lion, which isn't the mountain lion. There's a North American lion, and it was larger than the African lion by quite a bit. And that's all of these animals just sound terrifying, honestly. And to think that people lived alongside these and encountered them and fought them off or got them for food is just incredible. And I think that our DNA may have been manipulated potentially sometime in the distant past. I'm not sure that we're just a product of evolution. I think we might be a product of accelerated evolution. Um, I I think there is even if it's a little bit, there's some evidence that I can't really think of right now. Haha. That points to us being an accelerated evolutionary release. Damn, an accelerated species that didn't just get here by itself. And I'm not saying that all of these religious texts, a lot of them talk about it, but a lot of the stories of story of Genesis and a lot of these creation stories of early man in the universe, a lot of it really sounds like something along those lines. Like were Adam and Eve the first Homo sapiens? And if so, who created them? And yes, the Bible says God, and I'm not saying that there isn't a God. There has to be some divine intelligence or some kind of crazy intelligent being or beings that had to have created all of this. And it's just incredible. Um, I'll save religion and my thoughts on religion for a later video or podcast and a video. But yeah, I think every religion has value to it, and people can all gain, insight about themselves and the world and the people around them, and become a better person through a lot of different world religions. And there's not a single one that there's not one single religion that's the only religion where you'll find peace in yourself and in life. But it's really like which one speaks more to you. And everyone of every religion experiences God and experiences peace when they experience God. and to discount their it's just it doesn't make sense to discount somebody's experience with God. Like if a Muslim person experiences God and has is in prayer and worship, and they have the experiences, though they're talking to God, are being spoken to by God, which as a Christian I have experienced before at church. I've been deep in prayer, deep in worship, and the words of maybe the pastor or preacher speaking felt as almost though that God was trying to tell me something. And it's so overwhelming sometimes that it makes you want to cry. And to have people of different faiths experience the exact same thing, and then to say that, no, that's not God, you experience Satan was trying to convince you that your religion's wrong, or no, the, I mean, I don't know if it's just a mind brain thing that, or if people are actually experiencing something supernatural, but I don't feel as though it's right to discount other world religions. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of world religions that are not very culturally and not really appropriate to civilized society. Like there's a few beliefs in many world religions that kind of contradict certain freedoms that we believe for certain people in society, but there's still something there, even if it's been clouded, even if the word of in the text of the religion has been clouded by men. But I could go on a lot more in depth about religion at another time, but it's cool. Back to ancient history, back to human history. Um, yeah, the last podcast that I did, I touched briefly on global warming and how we kind of need it to sustain a large global population, and how there wouldn't be this many people on Earth right now if there wasn't longer growing periods, and how the carbon particulates in the atmosphere um, are at a sustainable amount for human life to thrive, even if it goes up quite a bit. And that the human carbon output is probably more negligible than they're saying it is. And even if that's not true, to feed 10 billion people by 2050, we kind of need the large amount of carbon in the atmosphere that we currently have. Well, we don't actually have a large amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Um, there's been a lot more carbon in the atmosphere and the Earth's global temperature over the global timeline. There's been a lot more carbon than there currently is, and in some cases, in most cases, that wasn't really a bad thing. So praise global warming, guys, because global cooling would kill you and your family. Sorry. Um, yeah, I think that kind of relates to human history and how we're able to sustain such a large global population because we've left the ice age. We have longer periods of warmth to grow more crops and to hunt. Um, more wildlife, and we're chilling because of it. And there's been times where it's got cold in the medieval ages, and that didn't really turn out too great for a lot of those guys. So honestly, I think we should be thankful that the Earth is warming up as it is. I mean, just maybe move out of Florida, and within the next century, and New York might be a little fucked too. I don't know, and a lot of other places, but wouldn't be the first time. Um, yeah, the amount of coastal cities that were submerged at the ending of the last ice age when the ice sheet over the North American continent had melted. There is thousands of cities that were on the coast that were just went underwater because the global sea level rose by, I believe, more than 300 feet, 400 feet, and there goes New Orleans. Like, so the entire area of Indonesia and the Philippines and all of those islands, chains of islands off the Pacific. I mean, not Pacific, off of Asia, next to the Pacific, between Asia and Australia, all used to be connected really close to one another and maybe connected all the way to Australia, if I'm not mistaken. And that allowed the people to populate Australia. They may have had to island hop, but it wasn't traveling across the Pacific, at least not yet. And like Easter Island is off the coast of, I believe, Chile. Um, a few hundred miles off the coast of Chile. And a small island, and it has had people for a very long time. I mean, we all are aware of the Moai statues and the Easter Island statues, and they got there by sailing from around Asia, Australia, over across the Pacific and populating that island. And they did the same in Chile and populated the entire South American continent, including the Amazon. Um, and there was probably most definitely some people crossing the Laurentide, the Bering Strait at some point, connecting Russia and Alaska, and they probably crossed down into North America through that. That is the conventional way of populating the Americas, but it's more complex than that. It's a lot more seafaring peoples that came across by water, especially if you want to stay out of that fucking ice, Jesus. And yeah, different cultures traveled different ways. It's arguable if they crossed by foot or by water first. I like to think that they crossed by water well before they crossed by land, um, or what used to be land. Now it's just the fucking ocean. But yeah, um, and people in the Amazon, there used to be cities of millions of people all across the Amazon. And we're finding these structures today through the use of LiDAR technology by scanning their rainforest. We're finding the jungle just consumed these cities and completely covered them in jungle. And now they're invisible to the naked eye. And you have to go there using LiDAR and analyzing the different human shaped structures that are abundant throughout it. Also, the whole Amazon itself may have been I may have got so dense, and a lot of the trees and plant life throughout the Amazon is all needed, is all food for human beings and all construction material and all plants that would, most of them are plants that could be utilized by people. And there's a theory, I don't know if it's theory or it may be confirmed, that the terra preta soil is not just the terra preta, we'll get into that, but the plants that are in the Amazon were planted and they grew in abundance through the use of the black earth that they created. There's this like man-made soil that's all across the entire Amazon that couldn't have happened naturally, and it's this perfect organic black earth that is the best topsoil you could ever want, and that's what makes the rainforest so lush, this amazing soil that ancient peoples had cultivated. And I just think that's really cool. I don't know how far that goes back. I don't know how old it is, but for the rainforest to get that big, if it was assisted in its magnificence by people, then that's just really cool. Um, yeah, but something happened globally sometime or at different times in different places to reset Egyptian civilization, to reset Peruvian civilization, to reset almost every single ancient site at some point has been completely destroyed. And there's evidence of flooding all over the world and different places at different times. And yeah, honestly, like Machu Picchu, I don't see how they carried that up on that fucking mountain. Like that's fucking cool. Um, there is a weird historical connection to ancient aliens. I mean, there's a whole damn TV series about it with multiple seasons. I wouldn't call them aliens. I mean, so the ancients, they were maybe deities or gods, and that's if they were even there. But there is some kind of weird, I don't want to call it evidence, but there's a lot of connections to otherworldly beings or beings that are non-human that may have assisted human civilization or human development. Um, it's really interesting. That's a whole deep dive, and honestly, like, yeah. What's cool about the pyramids is the coordinates of the pyramids on Earth are directly equal to the speed of light. You can look it up. Look up coordinates of the Great Pyramid, and then look up the speed of light, and then compare them. There's going to be a different decimal place in different places, but it's the exact same number. I think that's crazy. The um the Great Pyramid is in the exact dead center of all of the landmass in the Western Hemisphere. Um, I think that's cool, or what we consider, I guess, the Western Hemisphere. And yeah, that's really cool. There's some stones throughout multiple different ancient sites that have heat erode, like heat damage. They looked at almost a like when you heat stone to a particular temperature or above it, it starts to like shatter and turn like brittle. It starts to like break off once it's heated to its a certain point. Like granite and limestone and all these different materials will start to crumble or shatter apart. And you see evidence of heat damage to stone, and it's real interesting. It's like what could have happened to heat all this stone for it to get like that because it's definitely heat damage. And then there's so much like the precision of a lot of these this old stonework found throughout a lot of these ancient sites is just so bizarrely perfect. It's polished. It's it's more beautiful than any kitchen counter I think I've ever seen. Any kitchen island, all those fancy kitchen islands, granite, marble, the just you can't beat it. And people like to think of the Greeks and Roman people being much more advanced, or think of them as being more advanced because they came far later than the ancient Egyptians or ancient Peruvians. But the construction methods used by these ancient sites that are European were so much different and so much more fascinating and stand the test of time so much better. I mean, the Roman and Greek stuff is so much less older than this Egyptian, a lot of this Egyptian and Peruvian stuff. And there's other places, of course, but we think of them like as more advanced because they have the Roman crane and democracy and all of these crazy things and ideas. But you would need like 30 Roman cranes to lift some of these stones that these ancient peoples moved. Like in Baalbek, there's 1,000 ton stone that is just sitting at the foot of this building, and it's been built upon by later people on top of it. And there's a bunch of these big stones at Baalbek, and to lift one, and the Romans also use that site, and it's I think attributed to the Romans, or they don't know who's attributed, but they kind of attribute it to the Romans. But the best thing that the Romans could use to lift stone of that size would be a Roman crane. A Roman crane can lift about, I think, 36 tons. I mean, even if it's 20 to 40 tons, like, okay, impressive. That's a lot. And, these cranes were made of wood or different materials, and at that point you're just dealing with material failure at any weight over it, because at a certain amount it's going to sink, wood's going to snap, whatever it was made out of is just going to fail. um but the stones of Baalbek weigh anywhere from like 600 to 1,200 tons, the foundation stones, and you couldn't fit enough Roman cranes around the stone to move it anywhere. It And you would just the entire area would just be full of Roman cranes, and there wouldn't be enough room to put all the Roman cranes to even lift it. And they're stacked on top of each other, and some of these stones are stacked on top of each other, even bigger than the ones below it, and they're 10, 20 feet off the ground. And it's like, how do you lift 600 to 1,200 tons off the ground with anything with anything from 2,000 years? I mean, today, moving something 1,000 tons would be fucking too much. It'd be pointless because we would just break up it and move smaller blocks, because nobody's going to sit there and move that. Nobody's going to waste their time trying to move that or trying to come up with some kind of way to engineering or to like move that. The best cranes today couldn't lift 1,000 tons on their own. Um, I think I'm pretty sure that's a lot. I mean, we're talking about millions and millions of pounds. So yeah, I recommend if you're interested in like they had to have had some kind of levitation or some kind of I don't even fucking know how you'd move 1,000 ton stone. There's people that claim like with enough labor force and enough like levers and enough pulleys and enough people or elephants, or even though there's not any of that in Baltic, I'm pretty sure that you can move these things. No, I disagree entirely. I don't think it is humanly possible to move something that large. There was a stone that was moved in like the 1800s that was hundreds of tons, maybe even 1,000 tons, but it was just rolled on steel beams, and it was. I mean, they didn't have steel, and yeah, that is very interesting though, and that kind of makes me question like maybe there was a method of like conventional materials and people that could have done that. I don't believe it. We haven't found steel. And also the steel at that time was pretty good then when they moved that. that rock. They had to custom build a like 100 or tens of feet, maybe 100 feet long semi to move this one stone recently within the last couple decades, and that was a hard feat. Oh, it's just so interesting. I could have gotten more in depth with my alien UFO podcast yesterday. I just kind of ran out of talking points. Um, they recently unearthed. I'll go into it a little bit more right now. They recently unearthed these what looks like remains of like grays in Peru. There's a lot of the fake ones. With this, like they did X-rays on them, and all the bones are like. I mean, it could definitely be somebody who knows anatomy pretty well that put this together. But the alien remains that I saw recently from Peru look pretty fucking legit. I mean, I don't know why there'd be alien remains just lying around in Peru in some cave or whatever, but they looked fucking cool. They did a whole full body X-ray, and the head and hands looked legit, which probably would have been the hardest part. But then there's like some weird aspects of the body, like the spine or the ribs, and the connecting bones to the shoulders and like pelvis area that doesn't look it doesn't look human, that's for sure. It looks almost like somebody tried to replicate like shitty skeleton and rib cage, but the hands and head look like accurate as fuck to what you'd see in an X-ray. So I mean, I don't know. Um, but yeah, there's definitely like grays. I don't know. They probably don't like being called grays, but I pretty firmly believe that there's alien life or some kind of non-human intelligence that looks like your typical alien that you can picture in your head right now that you've seen tons of images, photos, and art of online. Most of it fake, probably all of it, but they do look like that. I'm pretty sure of it. It's not just that I have a feeling, it's that there's so much like, it's not just mouth, it's not just like random people. I mean, it's a lot of random people, tens of thousands of random people that have said that they've seen these things. There's obvious, there's a lot more to prove the existence of UFOs than there is to prove the existence of biological aliens, and the UFOs, a lot of them aren't from any government. I'm quite sure about that. But now I'm going to talk about Atlantis. Um, so Atlantis, uh, Atlantic, uh, kind of related in that wording. So there's a guy by the name of Jimmy Curicetti. Randall Carlson believes or thinks it's probably in the Azores. Um, Azores is kind of in the middle of the Atlantic. Um, kind of, exactly as Plato described. Uh, not that, I mean, I'm pretty sure Atlantis probably existed, but a lot of people say that it was. Apparently, Plato got it from his uncle or great uncle Solon, and he went to Egypt and spoke to a priest or a priestess, an Egyptian, and they told him that there was a city by the name of Atlantis that sunk or disappeared in the year 9,000 years before his time. So yeah, right around the end of the last ice age, which checks out. That would be the time that you would see a city like Atlantis submerge or be washed over, or whatever may have happened to it wherever it was. Now, it's described to be an island city that was awake all day and all night, like you see in New York, Chicago, like a big city. So probably 10, 20 million plus people, and rich in trade, resources, lush, green, tropical. And there's a few reasons why it could be in the mid-Atlantic ridge along it, the Azores Plateau. Or not a plateau, maybe it's a plateau. I don't know. The Azores. Azores used to be a lot larger than it currently is. Now it's just some islands, but it used to be a larger island or more close to a continent at some point. Same in the Pacific. I think there's another large island that used to exist there that's now scattered about. But I'll talk about Jimmy Corsetti's bright insight on YouTube, his idea on the theory of Atlantis first being the Eye of the Sahara in Africa, which you can see it from if you go on Google Maps or Google Earth and you just go to Africa, you go to West Africa, kind of northwest-ish Africa, uh, west of the Sahara, kind of in Mauritania, you'll see this ring structure, and it's called the Eye of the Sahara because it almost looks like an eye, and it's like it has rings, and it's said to have been formed naturally. Um, some people used to think it was an impact crater. Uh, some people think it's a volcanic, um, like rings. I'm not too sure, but even if it is, I'm not saying it's man-made, but if it's natural, we build our cities along natural formations all the time. Um, so Atlantis was described to be a city of concentric rings and of water and lands, land, water, lands, water, land, water. I might have added an extra ring there. I don't know. And it kind of fits that description perfectly. It is large enough. The the diameter of it is large enough to hold a population in the few millions, the tens of millions. Um, which is what would make a city that was rich in trade and awake all day and night. And because, like modern cities, you have that nightlife and you have the night work and the day work, and it's in Mauritania in Africa, which isn't an island, even though it was described as an island. But that, could be lost over time in translation or story, or it doesn't necessarily have to be an island. And I think if you transcribe the original text, it doesn't necessarily stay island, if I'm not mistaken. But Randall Carlson, he may be right about the Azores. Jimmy Corsetti may be right about the Isles of the Sahara, or none of them. Who knows? But the Atlantis is described as having mountains to the north. There's the Atlas Mountains to the north in Mauritania. So Atlas, Atlantis. The first the first king of Mauritania was called King Atlas. The To the west of Mauritania, or the Eye of the Sahara, it was it's the Atlantic Ocean, Atlantis. There's just so much references in that region to the word Atlas, Atlantis, Atlantic. So many in that area, and it was said to be west of the Pillars of Hercules, out in the Atlantic somewhere. And obviously, like trying to trade with other nations when you're an island nation would be pretty difficult. Uh, and it said it had 10 kingdoms. So very well, there could have been some over there at the Azores, and there could have been the capital city in the Eye of the Sahara or wherever. But the Eye of the Sahara, if you look at it on Google Maps, it also has like white, like powder, white powder at the bottom of the each of the rings. In the middle of each of the rings, there's this white substance that's salt, and that's from evaporated seawater that settled there and evaporated. And now that region is more desert than lush. But during the time Atlantis was to have said to have been destroyed, it it would that area would have been lush, and it had rivers flowing throughout Africa during that same time. So pretty cool. If you want to learn more about Jimmy Corsetti, Bright Insights channel, and Theory on Atlantis, uh, I would go watch his video, The Eye of the Sahara. Uh, yeah, there might be a few videos back, but it's pretty good. And then Randall Carlson does this like 10-part series on it on his channel. But he talks about Atlantis in depth. The story of Atlantis looks at different translations from different texts. And I'm sure he thinks that if it's anything, it might be the Azores. And the Azores has a lot of stuff going for it in terms of it being Atlantis. Oh, and back to the Eye of the Sahara. You go west of the Pillars of Hercules, as it was said to have been. And you go out into the middle of the ocean, you're kind of just out in the middle of it, the Atlantic. But if you travel down west alongside the African coastline down to the Eye of the Sahara, that would have been a lot easier uh, for trade and travel across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Uh, it makes a lot of sense. I wonder how advanced Atlantis could have been. Um, a lot of depictions of Atlantis is like flying vehicles and interesting stuff. I'm not saying that it had that. I'm just saying like maybe they did have some kind of ancient technology of some sort, like the ancient Egyptians, the pre-ancient Egyptians, not the conventional ancient Egyptians that people think of, because although sophisticated for their time, nowhere near compared to their ancestors. And this is my belief. This is not just my belief, this is the belief of many others who have studied this for most of their life. And I recommend going and checking out Robert Schoch's work, John Anthony West's work, Randall Carlson's work, Graham Hancock's work, um, a lot of cool guys who worked on this stuff. Christopher Dunn, all of these guys. And yeah, I'm gonna call it. I call it on the episode. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate you if you've made it towards the end. Again, go look into the work of those people that I mentioned. Last video, I mentioned some people who are deep in the UFO alien area of expertise. And this video a few times, and at the end, I mentioned some names of some really cool people who've done a lot of work in ancient history and ancient technology and human prehistory and all that cool stuff. I could go on and on and on about this. I could talk about a lot more, but I'll save that for later. Uh, Again, thank you. If you want to be on the show, just My email will be in the description. Send me an email. Give me maybe an idea of what you'd like to talk about. It could be honestly anything. Just looking for interesting people to talk to, help grow my channel. I just started it. I've been wanting to do YouTube and like different types of social media stuff for a long time. And this is the easiest way for me to get out stuff that I want to talk about, other than making super long documentaries that's taking me forever. I mean, I've halted work on the one I'm working on now. It's turning out really good. It's just like it's really time consuming. So I'm just putting these out there in the void and hope that they get some kind of attention. Again, email me, leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe, and go check out those guys because they're really cool. But always come back and check on me because I'm gonna give you some more cool stuff to listen to. And some of you listening to this probably weren't aware of some of this stuff, and some of you listening to this are probably aware of all of it and knew every single thing I was talking about and some. But thank you for listening, and goodbye.